saying context graph is like saying wet water, because that is what a graph does, is it lends context.
Welcome to It's About Data, episode 56. Jessica Talisman joins us again to discuss context graphs and knowledge infrastructure. This episode is part of our 1-year anniversary series. All right, Jessica, welcome again. You were one of our very early guests and one of our very early, extremely popular episodes. You're right in the middle of the zeitgeist with talking about all things knowledge graphs and ontologies. And we're almost at the 1-year anniversary here, as Tony mentioned before we kick things off here. So what's on your mind right now? What are we going to talk about today?
Oh, gosh. Let's see, context and knowledge, and if we have time, talk about reading and just sort of the learning paradigm.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So context, if there were topics for 2025, I probably would have told you agents. I think Tony and I would agree on that. But context as well, right? Like we've actually been talking about context for a couple of years now, but it's very much back in the kind of buzzosphere, I'll call it, of like, this is really important and it's worth $1 trillion. So maybe tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So, context is what I like to say. It's like saying context graph is like saying wet water, because that is what a graph does, is it lends context. So it's a little ambiguous of a term. We using context in a sentence, I'm almost allergic to it now, but context is the demand for adding rich knowledge, basically rich knowledge infrastructure. I think most of it came from, obviously, Anthropic, when they introduced the idea of the context window and sort of had a call to action in 2025 around context and the need for context, especially at prompt time. It goes hand in hand with RAG. We can say RAG is context, and it's a type of context window. I wrote a 4-part series. I was kind of obsessed. I like to say it's sort of like Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, with modeling the mashed potatoes to find I was obsessed with this idea of workflows, and I've worked very intensely and intimately building knowledge graphs and ontologies and these sort of knowledge infrastructures for workflows, because that's what librarians do. So I worked with a Milan research group, Cephriel, who wrote papers and had a 3-year EU Commission study around procedural knowledge. And they built procedural knowledge ontology. Traditionally in knowledge management, things like context graphs, or what's being positioned as context graphs, is in the domain of process and procedural knowledge. So we are familiar with process mining and decision traces and decision intelligence. But if we wrap that all up in context, that would be the context graph, would be process and procedural knowledge. Yeah. So I wrote that series, and I introduced the procedural knowledge ontology and how to implement it and its benefits, including the GitHub repos and the scholarly peer-reviewed papers. And then should we go into what happened next?
Yes, what happened next?
What happened next?
Who can really care about this topic?
Yeah. I mean, we're all trying to solve the context graph problem, but
right.
And so that's become the big hot buzzword. Context turned into context graphs, the things we all need, because we want to find out, the premise of context graphs. And I'll draw the parallel between what I wrote about, is figuring out not just who made decisions, but why.
Yes.
That's the promise. Who made decisions, but why? And that actually was verbiage or exact match to the language that was used throughout my 4-part process knowledge management series. Was talking about decision traces, execution traces, all of the same things, but putting it in the context of a knowledge infrastructure and knowledge management. So just keep in mind, my process knowledge management series, the last article was published on the 18th of December. On December 22nd, a blog post came out called Context Graphs, the New AI $1 Trillion Opportunity.
And it was everywhere, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm very interested in the work you
Everywhere.
do, but I'm not in that space, but I saw it all over the place. And you saw it all over the place too, I think, Tony, all
All
over
over the
And the
LinkedIn.
other
place.
Yeah.
thing also is that, about a year ago, we were talking knowledge graphs. Now, all of a sudden, we're talking context graphs. Forget about the fact that, as we found, knowledge graphs was a lot of talk last year and not much adoption. But all of a sudden, knowledge graphs are passe. It's context graphs.
It's
Yes.
context graphs.
Yes.
And it's, my one question around that is we're avoiding knowledge, the actual
Mm-hmm.
work around
Mm-hmm.
knowledge
Yeah.
infrastructures, knowledge
Yeah.
management, knowledge organization. It's ironic because when we look at training data for AI, foundational AI models, they leverage these knowledge graph, knowledge infrastructures like Wikipedia, Wikidata, the
Yeah.
Getty,
Right.
Google patents. These are all rich, ontology rich ecosystems
Mm-hmm.
where you can trace the lineage of ideas, the
Mm-hmm.
connection between
Mm-hmm.
ideas. You have an idea of also, you can theoretically extract execution and decision traces with Sparkle queries. But yeah, knowledge management is not easy. It's hard. And the
Right.
other part of it, one of the points in the thesis of context graphs is that you can use agents and it didn't really specify exactly what you'd use to be able to extract decision traces and
Mm-hmm.
execution traces. But the idea was that you can magically manifest tacit knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So if we know anything from knowledge management, tacit knowledge, and this is something I wrote in my series, which was extracted and represented in the context graph blog, is it's
Mm-hmm.
in Slack threads and in people's heads.
Mm-hmm.
But the tacit knowledge, the nature of tacit knowledge is it's not documented anywhere. It's not encoded anywhere. It's not written down. It's in people's heads. And as of now, unless you look at like Neuralink or something like that, we haven't embedded intelligence like artificial intelligence into people's
Right.
heads. There's no way. There's a human element to knowledge management. There's a human in the loop.
Mm-hmm.
So what we don't know, we don't know. Process mining cannot capture, for example, tacit knowledge. And ultimately, to
Mm-hmm.
make tacit knowledge and decision traces actionable, it has to be connected to the larger knowledge infrastructure, which again goes to
Right.
lineage and to that sort of representation of things being connected.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I mean, there are a couple ways to take this. One is that, of course, there's basically the salacious, which is basically who said what. Uh, but the other part of this, I think, so the deeper issue is that, and we were starting, before Verizon cut me off last time, and maybe I should have taken the hint there, was basically talking about that, I mean, as you said,
Yeah.
Jessica, understanding context, that's not a new thing. We've,
No.
even before, I mean, like, to understand, like, for instance, when you're
Yeah.
in the art of negotiation, you want to understand where the other party is coming from and have some sort of
Right.
insight into that.
Yes.
And the thing is, when we're looking at, in terms of basically instantiate this, within an organization, we tried efforts in the past like knowledge management. We then, then about 20, that was back in I think the 1980s. Good luck with that. Then, the early 2000s, we started looking at, well, maybe we can sort of represent this, in basically in RDF, triple graphs, so, kind of the semantic web idea. And the problem with all that, it was just very labor intensive. The question I have, and of course, this sort of borders on this is almost getting to be a very meta type question, because you said, what you were talking about all of a sudden started to replicate. But what I'm wondering is, yes, AI can be used to plagiarize, but on the other hand, could AI be used in this case to discover some of this intuitive, maybe by looking at the patterns of human behavior and why they behave
Yeah.
that way in those scenarios?
Yes. But the one thing about AI is its default tends, unless you explicitly ask it to provide citations
Yep.
and to
Yeah.
provide linking, it's going to strip that provenance.
Yep.
So one of the most important things is maintaining the lineage of ideas, because
Agree.
traditionally and best practices in research, this is like, it's been established and this is what libraries and archives do very well,
Yeah.
and even government to some extent, is it it maintains the provenance of ideas and resources throughout the life cycle. So while we can manifest, and start to look into how these things are created and what's their connection to other things within an ecosystem, that lineage is foundational. And what's interesting right now is because the default is to strip the citations and the lineage of ideas. And then now we've reached the end, or we're reaching the end. There's not a whole lot of training, like fresh training data out there for these foundational models. The foundational models are starting to consume AI generated content that has stripped, it's synthetic data that is stripped the citations and the lineage and the provenance. So yes, the creation, now the one good thing is that once you set up your frameworks for ontologies and knowledge graphs, a lot of these AI models are actually pretty good of helping to do a lot of the heavy lifting of building these ontologies, where then it does become really a knowledge infrastructure, knowledge management type of effort. But the thing is that humans own knowledge. Ultimately, humans own knowledge. Ultimately, humans create new knowledge. So the question of, we're so hungry to automate and to just make things faster, build fast and break things. The bigger question is, do we want to build fast and break things when we're talking about our own knowledge?
Yeah. Well, and I completely agree that we're moving fast and breaking things. In fact, I would argue that we're making with AI a lot of the same mistakes that we made with big data. So specifically, big data, yes, people vaguely knew that lineage of data was important, that it was important where it came from, but largely we just ignored that, and we were still ignoring it in 2015. And yes, we talk about lineage a lot now for structured data, but we're still struggling with this, right? We've been struggling through the whole modern data stack era. And what happened with RAG and with vector databases is, yes, there are right ways to do this and wrong ways to do this. So the right way to do it is that you take trusted sources of information like books, you chunk up those pieces of data, and you put those in vector databases so they can be found by AI and RAG. And then when they find something, they cite it and they say, oh, this came from, I don't know, Hamlet, whatever act. And, here's the quote. And they'll point you to the exact source. The sloppy way to do it is you feed the whole internet in. You have no provenance. You don't even have URLs. And you just pull stuff out of this RAG database for context, but you have no idea where it came from. And I would argue that this is not a new thing. The whole process of memeing across the internet is kind of the same thing done by humans, but we're treating this like it's somehow a gold standard of knowledge when it's just as sloppy as any misinformation you would read on Facebook, for example, or worse.
I mean, that's really evident. And the idea that I've had several people after the context graph fiasco, because I did run my 4 pieces in the context graph piece and several of their other pieces through plagiarism checkers. And so I was able to discover that there was something there. But what's interesting is the response from people. And I think we're getting accustomed to this idea of, well, what's intellectual property anymore? Why does that matter? And that also is another angle, is we're becoming desensitized to this recycling of ideas, where it doesn't seem to matter, or we're not really clear on where's the boundary. It's similar. There was the Digital Millennial Copyright Act with the inception of the internet, right? And that act was created because, of course, we didn't have coverage for digital resources like books and magazines and what have you. So we had to create sort of copyright laws around that to try to assemble or make the internet a little bit more reliable, and digital spaces. And then we haven't done the same with AI. There's not a new Digital Millennial Copyright Act, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think what I'd like to go back to is basically talking about the importance of lineage, what we used to say in the research world, in the academic world, footnotes, citations. How do we build this in going forward? And the other part also is that if we start going to, say, smaller, more domain-specific models, might that be a way to make this whole problem more manageable, or this challenge more manageable?
Yes, domain-specific, small language models, those are all great opportunities. I mean, we're basically using AI, I think, for some tasks that are not necessarily best for AI systems. That's the other problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a one tool to solve it all. That's something that's
Right,
really, really
right.
important. But I will tell you that within the ontology and knowledge graph space, even in simple metadata systems, you have provenance. You have
Yes.
Prove. A Prove is an ontology specific
Right.
for tracking provenance and lineage, and it's very simple. So
Yeah.
that's something that we can do to help to encourage and to maintain provenance, because it matters within organizations as well.
Mhm.
I will tell you, like, when I worked at Amazon, that's one company that actually does a very good job of maintaining provenance within their infrastructure.
Yeah, and it makes sense because they what are their roots? Well, in a sense, they started as a library company, right? Like, what was Amazon really good at? Well, back when it was hard to find books, you could find anything on Amazon, even in the 90s. And to do that, they had to be really good at tracing information and really good search and being able to find sources for things and find out, okay, if you search for this quote, it came from this book, buy this book from us, And Google as well. Yeah, go ahead.
That's what's so interesting is Amazon and Google have had long-standing partnerships.
Yeah.
With libraries and the library systems, including Wikidata. So that whole network of information, it's like Goodreads, Google, Amazon, Wikidata, and the whole worldwide networked library system.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're all interconnected in this sort of web that maintains the lineage of things, which is fascinating. I think something that's not talked about a lot is another way that we encourage lineage is because each concept within a knowledge graph has a URI.
Yep.
And it's actually a unique identifier specific to that context.
Yeah.
Your small language model or whatever it is, your closed kind of model or RAG implementation can have and be driven by your URI patterns. That is how we link things. It goes back to Tim Berners-Lee original idea of the internet, of linking data across the internet.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we can just barely scratch the surface of this topic, but tell our listeners and watchers again about the name of your Substack, and we'll put a link in the description as well.
So it's called Intentional Arrangement. So you can find my Substack there, and I write about how to build these knowledge infrastructures. So I have lots of tutorials, and then I have thinking pieces as well. So I have a lot of content on there. So.
And it's really great, the stuff I've read. You are very prolific.
Gosh.
I haven't caught up with everything, but it's really great material. So I go check it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good talking.
Thank you.